What if everything you were taught about the ancient world was a lie? You've heard it 1,000 times. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of writing, law, agriculture, and human progress. Sounds almost romantic, doesn't it? Great rivers, towering temples, the dawn of humanity's greatest chapter. But what if that story is missing something? What if the version they taught you in school was just the highlight reel, and the actual footage was something far darker, far more terrifying, and far more brutal than anyone wants to admit? Here's what nobody talks about. What was it actually like to wake up in ancient Mesopotamia on an ordinary morning? What did you eat? What happened when you got sick? And who or what decided whether you lived or died? What kind of civilization builds its greatest cities on land that it is actively destroying beneath its own feet and doesn't even know it? What kind of justice system makes you terrified to even accidentally break the law? And perhaps the darkest question of all, what did the gods of this civilization actually demand from their people? And how far were ordinary men and women willing to go to satisfy them? Because the answers to these questions don't sound like the cradle of civilization. They sound like a nightmare. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to be very grateful you were not born 5,000 years ago, because today we're going back to the very beginning. And trust me, it only gets worse from here. To understand just how brutal Mesopotamia really was, you first need to understand where it was and what it was up against from the very beginning. Mesopotamia. The name itself comes from the ancient Greek, meaning the land between the rivers. Sitting between the Tigris and the Euphrates in what is largely modern-day Iraq, this was the stage upon which humanity's earliest civilizations were built. City-states like Ur, Babylon, Akkad, and Nineveh rose here. The world's first written language was scratched into clay tablets here. The first legal codes were carved into stone here. By almost every measure, this is where organized human society began. And on the surface, it sounds extraordinary. But here's the thing about building a civilization between two rivers. You are entirely, completely, and helplessly at their mercy. The Tigris and Euphrates were not gentle, predictable rivers. They were volatile, unpredictable, almost alive in the way they behaved. One season they fed you, the next they wiped you off the map without a moment's warning. The people who settled here didn't choose an easy life. They chose a constant, grinding battle against nature, against each other, and against forces they couldn't even begin to understand. And the population that lived through this? Mostly farmers, laborers, and slaves. Ordinary people with no power, no protection, and no safety net. People who woke up every single day not knowing whether the rivers would feed their crops or drown their children. This was not a paradise, this was a pressure cooker. And the heat hadn't even started yet. Imagine waking up before sunrise. The air is already thick and heavy, pressing down on you like a wet blanket. By mid-morning, the temperature will climb past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. There is no shade, there is no breeze, there is no relief, and you still have to work. Because in Mesopotamia, survival wasn't given, it was earned. Every single day. Your entire existence revolved around the irrigation canals that snaked through the landscape like lifelines. Without them, your crops died. Without your crops, you starved. So, before you ate, before you rested, before you did anything else, you dug. You cleared silt. You maintained channels. You hauled water under a sun that felt like it was trying to punish you personally. And when the work was done, you came home to a meal that would make even the most basic modern diet look luxurious. Barley mush, unleavened bread, warm beer. That was it. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Not because people didn't want better, but because better simply didn't exist. But the labor and the diet weren't even the worst of it. Because at any moment, without warning, the rivers could turn on you. The Tigris and Euphrates didn't flood on a schedule. They flooded on a mood. Flash floods tore through communities with terrifying speed, swallowing mud brick homes, destroying crops that took months to grow, and killing anyone who couldn't get out of the way fast enough. Entire villages, simply gone. Washed away like they never existed, and if the floods didn't get you, the disease would. The same canals that kept you alive were also slow, stagnant, and absolutely teeming with waterborne killers, dysentery, malaria, parasites. Living alongside water in Mesopotamia wasn't just a lifestyle, it was a gamble you took every single morning. A gamble that millions lost. But even that wasn't the darkest thing happening in this civilization. Not even close. So you've survived the floods, you've survived the labor, you've survived the diet and the disease, you're still standing. But now you're sick, not a common cold, not something a good night's sleep will fix. You're really sick. Fever, pain, weakness, the kind that makes you wonder if you'll see tomorrow. So you do what any desperate person in ancient Mesopotamia would do. You call the healer. And here is where things take a turn that your modern brain is simply not prepared for. Because in Mesopotamia, illness wasn't seen as a biological problem. It was seen as a spiritual one. You weren't sick because of bacteria or parasites or contaminated water. You were sick because a god was angry with you. Or worse, a demon had taken up residence inside your body. And the only way to fix that was to fight the supernatural with the supernatural. So the healer arrives, and the treatment begins. Incantations are chanted over your burning body. Magic spells are recited to drive out the evil spirits. Poultices made from ingredients that would make your stomach turn, including animal dung, are pressed against your skin. Elaborate exorcism rituals are performed around you while you lie there, feverish and terrified, completely at the mercy of a medical system built entirely on superstition. And if none of that worked, the gods simply weren't satisfied yet. Which brings us to the darkest corner of Mesopotamian civilization. The part that history books often gloss over. The part that reveals just how desperate, how fearful, and how deeply trapped these people truly were. Human sacrifice. It was real, it was practiced, and it was not rare. When disaster struck, when floods destroyed everything, when famine gripped the land, when wars were lost and cities crumbled, the people of Mesopotamia believed there was only one currency powerful enough to appease their gods: human life. And the most valuable offering of all? A child. Archaeological excavations across Mesopotamia have uncovered evidence of ritualistic sacrifices, including children, buried beneath temples and city foundations. This wasn't the act of monsters. These were people so consumed by fear, so crushed under the weight of a brutal and unpredictable world that they genuinely believed this was the only way to survive. And then, something extraordinary happened. A man named Abraham, who came directly from the Mesopotamian city of Ur, was commanded by God to take his beloved son Isaac to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him. For Abraham, a man raised in this culture, this command would not have been unthinkable. This was the world he came from. This was what the gods demanded. But at the critical moment, God stopped him. A ram, caught by its horns in a nearby thicket, was provided as the sacrifice instead. And Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." Here's where it gets chilling. When archaeologists excavated the ancient city of Ur, Abraham's own hometown, they found something remarkable buried in the ruins: a statue of a ram, caught in a thicket. Coincidence, you decide? So what happened to a civilization living under this kind of pressure? When fear is your foundation, when every flood, every famine, every fever feels like divine punishment, when the gods demand everything and guarantee nothing, when survival itself feels like a privilege that can be revoked at any moment, you get desperate, you get paranoid, and eventually, you get brutal. Because the darkness of Mesopotamia didn't stop at religion. It bled into law, it bled into politics, it bled into every corner of daily life until cruelty wasn't the exception. It was the system. Enter Hammurabi, king of Babylon, author of one of the world's first written legal codes, celebrated in history textbooks as a pioneer of justice and order. And technically, that's true. Hammurabi's code was groundbreaking. It was organized, written, and applied consistently across the empire. But don't let that fool you. This was not a gentle system. If you destroyed someone's property, yours was destroyed. If you caused someone to lose a limb, you lost the same limb. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son was executed. Not the builder, his son. Justice in Mesopotamia wasn't blind. It was savage. And if you found yourself on the wrong side of a war, which was almost inevitable given how frequently these city-states clashed over water rights, trade routes, and territory, the consequences were immediate and merciless. Surrender didn't guarantee survival. Losing a battle could mean instant enslavement. Losing a war could mean the complete annihilation of your community. Men killed, women taken, children enslaved, entire populations uprooted and relocated to serve the victorious empire. No trial, no appeal, no mercy. This was the immediate reality of life in ancient Mesopotamia, not the grand temples and written laws that history chooses to remember, but the fear underneath them, the violence holding it all together. And the worst part? The land itself was dying, and nobody knew it yet. Here is perhaps the most haunting part of the entire Mesopotamian story. All of it, the labor, the sacrifice, the warfare, the suffering, was built on land that was slowly, quietly, and irreversibly destroying itself. Remember those irrigation canals? The ones that defined every waking moment of a Mesopotamian's life? The ones they dug and maintained and died protecting? Those same canals were poisoning the very earth they depended on. Here's what was happening beneath the surface. River water contains salt. Not much, barely detectable. But when you irrigate land for decades, for centuries, that salt accumulates, layer by microscopic layer, season after season. And because the ancient Mesopotamians used only enough water to keep their crops alive, never enough to flush the salt away, it just kept building. Quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. Until one day, the crops stopped growing. Not because of floods, not because of war, but because the soil itself had been poisoned beyond recovery. Ancient Babylon, once the most powerful and well-fed city on the entire planet, found itself surrounded by land that could no longer produce food. The agricultural foundation that built one of history's greatest empires simply collapsed from within. And here's the truly terrifying part. This process is almost completely irreversible. You cannot wash the salt away. You cannot rotate your crops around it. Once it happens forever. Mesopotamia holds the tragic distinction of being the first civilization in human history to permanently destroy its own farmland through irrigation. A problem so severe that we are still seeing its echoes today. In the Vietnamese deltas, in the shrinking Aral Sea, in the crusting salt flats of the American West. The cradle of civilization didn't just fall, it poisoned its own crib. And yet, as dark and brutal as Mesopotamia was, it wasn't the only ancient civilization hiding terrifying secrets beneath its glorified surface. Because if you think waking up in ancient Mesopotamia sounds like a nightmare, wait until you hear what daily life looked like in ancient Rome. Gleaming white marble temples, brilliant architecture, the gladiators. But behind all of that, a world just as brutal, just as desperate, and just as dark. That video is sitting right there waiting for you. Click it. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Ancient Rome. Hidden terrifying secrets beneath its glorified surface. A civilization worshipped by history, but built on fear, blood, and survival.